Hello and welcome to the Analytics Show, the podcast of business through the lens of data science. But together, we'll dive into learning and sharing where various industries are heading and how data and analytics is at the heart of shaping business growth and productivity. Let's spark different ways of thinking about data and analytics that is relevant to you and prepare your business for future disruption. I'm your host, Jason Tan. I'm delighted you could make it on this journey with us. Hey guys, to continue to get support tips, techniques, and tools and learn from the expert, hit that subscribe button wherever you are so we can keep in touch and continue our lifelong learning together. So, are you using your company data to its full potential? Take our embedded analytic assessment to find out your score. A leading organization like Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google have moved beyond dashboard and embedded data science directly into their daily business operation. With our 3-minute test, you will discover your potential in optimizing customer experience and revenue through embedded analytics. You will gain greater clarity, insight, and advice to embed analytics. Plus, you will receive customized results instantly. Find the link to this assessment in the description of this episode. Good morning, I think. We're still in the morning. Peter, welcome to the Analytics Show podcast. So excited to have you here today and share with us some of the things that we'll be talking in the episode.
Thank you, Jason. It's an honour and a privilege to be invited. I never imagined that I'd be given an opportunity, so thank you.
Well, the pleasure is mine. Now, when I was doing my research about preparing this interview, I was reading your LinkedIn article and something that you say titled as a accidental internal auditor. I thought I really enjoyed it. I think it's something that a lot of people perhaps could relate to as well, where sometimes we go into a career direction by accident. And I know it certainly happened to me at some stage. Can you tell us more about it?
Oh, certainly, Jason. It's something where, as you said, sometimes our careers take a different direction to what we planned on. So originally, I always wanted to be a scientist. And through circumstances, I ended up studying accountancy and I became an accountant. And then there was an opportunity at the university to step into the role as an auditor or an internal auditor for a period. And it was simply to provide some stability because there had been some problems associated with recruitment. And I managed to make a few changes in the position. So I actually implemented some continuous controls monitoring. And apparently they had been trying to achieve that result for a period. I implemented some dashboard reporting. And next thing I was asked if I could stay. And I was shocked that they actually seemed to want me in the role because that wasn't my background. And a colleague said, "Hey, Pete, how did you actually get into this?" So I thought, well, I'm going to write a LinkedIn article. And I wanted to do it for several reasons. One was explain the accidental journey, but also to actually open up and start talking about data, analytics, automation, other components that relate to internal audit, because one of the things is that internal audit relies on data quality, and relies on insights of data. And so this was going to be my segue or opening up to actually start having that narrative as part of my profile.
I love it. I think we'll talk a lot more about that later on. So how has been the responses that you're receiving so far?
It's very interesting because I've been in a situation where I've started to actually put some publications out through the Institute of Internal Auditors. And I recently was honoured in that someone said to me, "Oh, look, we'd love one of these. Can we translate it into Spanish? Because we actually want to have it in Brazil." And I never sort of thought that would actually occur. It's also the case where if we sort of look at stereotypes, we tend to think of internal auditors as old people walking around with a notepad, pen, ticking, flicking, and we don't really seem to think of it as cutting edge, leading edge, getting involved in data, trying to add massive insights through internal and external data. And one of the things that I've noticed is that internal audit loves to focus on internal data. They're not necessarily at the stage yet where they're starting to focus on external data.
Yes.
And also not bringing the two together. And in some of the work that I've started to do just recently, we're actually bringing the two together. And I have to also acknowledge at this point, Jason, part of the reason we met was your insights in relation to trying to automate and detect fraud. And my background in internal audit allowed us to start with a synergy where we're starting that discussion and trying to form a narrative about how we can work smarter and get people to work smarter rather than work harder.
Exactly. Now, I actually think that writing for publication or perhaps doing podcasts and some of these things is really important for one to develop their career. How would you encourage the internal auditor to follow some of those things that you have done and get their name out there to establish themselves and build that as part of their career?
The first thing I'd encourage someone to do is be brave. Make a decision, because the one thing about life I hate is where someone goes, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I? Either do it or don't do it. Let's go back to Yoda. There's nothing about thinking, do it or don't do it. I love Yoda for that perspective. And sorry for the cultural reference there. And then when you make that decision, if you do have fears or concerns, find a mentor. Find someone you can bounce ideas off. Try and socialise it amongst your own peers before you put it out there. At least do a litmus test. And you find the fact that you're being brave. In most cases, I found 99% of people applaud you.
Yeah.
Occasionally you get that 1% goes, oh, well, why would you do that? But they're going to say that about everyone, and they're going to say that about everything. You say good morning to some of those people and they go, huh. And then that's the sort of greeting that you get from them. So be brave, embrace it, give it a go. The worst thing that could happen is someone doesn't like it. The best thing that can happen is you elevate your profile.
Exactly. I often think about that the number of the haters is the quality and the level of the success. Yes. Now, coming back to your current role as a director of assurance services at the University of Southern Queensland, share a little bit more about your role and also the university.
I'd absolutely love to. So to probably start talking about the university is the most important aspect, because that provides context for everything else. So the University of Southern Queensland is based in Toowoomba. Now, Toowoomba is a regional centre in Queensland, Australia, and Toowoomba is located approximately 2 hours inland from Brisbane. So it's on what's termed the Great Dividing Range. So we're certainly not as warm as Brisbane is, and we certainly don't have the humidity. It's very well known for the Carnival of Flowers. And the University of Southern Queensland is a dynamic university, and it's been providing distance education primarily to a cohort of students all the way around the world. So we've got about 27,500 students. We deliver approximately 500 courses. Wow. And I think from memory, there's about 120 odd languages spoken by the staff. So we're a multicultural collection of people in a regional setting. And we've got 3 campuses. One is Toowoomba, one is Springfield, and one is Ipswich. And one of our biggest achievements is that people that study through USQ have the highest graduate starting salaries in Australia. So if you want to make money, USQ is a great way to make money in terms of starting off as a graduate. But not only is it a great way to make money, it's also a great way to start a career. So I've been fortunate that I've been employed at the university for a number of years. And I've now ended up just recently as the Director of Assurance, as you mentioned. So the role is really part of the governance function. So when we have an organisation, we have a board, and the board likes to make sure that the organisation is doing the right thing. So in our instance, the board is University Council, and they have a subcommittee called Audit and Risk. And the Audit and Risk Committee wants to know, are we doing the right thing? In terms of, are we protecting the university assets? Are we efficient and effective in terms of our utilisation of assets and resources? And also, are we managing risk? And risk is a big thing that enterprises get concerned about because, as you imagine, COVID caused a lot of chaos for people. But one of the things that I always like to try and encourage people to think about when we start talking about risk is risk isn't just something about bad things happening. Risk is about a changing environment creating opportunities. And so when I hear people often talk about risk, they go, oh, we've got to fix this risk, or we've got to stop this. Or they don't go, brilliant, the world is changing. There are now opportunities. There are more millionaires made during recessions. There are more opportunities to innovate products when the world changes. This is why we have disruptive technology. Let's embrace risk as opportunities, not just as threats. And that's my role, to try and put the positive spin on opportunities, manage the bad consequences of risk, and make sure that the council's informed.
So for the people like myself who lack of the understanding in this space, can you tell us a bit more if that is part compliance, internal audit is part of the role of you, what you do with the risk as a director of assurance?
Certainly. So when I do an audit, I may be looking at compliance. So are we meeting our legislative obligation? And there's several reasons why we'd be looking at compliance in that regard. One, obviously you don't want to be fined.
Yes.
But two, another aspect is when we've got standards, because compliance isn't necessarily just about the law, it's sometimes also about compliance with standards and best practice. So are we effectively utilising our assets and having our processes at best practice? So compliance is bigger than just simply making sure we're doing the right thing as far as the law is concerned. And in many cases, internal audit has a mandate to look at the ethics and culture of an organisation. Because you can be compliant with the law, but you may not necessarily be acting ethically, because society judges ethics different to the way it judges culture. So internal audit actually has quite a big mandate when you look at it.
Fascinating. Now, bringing this to the data analytic perspective, so what does your work with this internal audit, risk, compliance mean for the data and analytic professional?
So for us, our role is actually about data. So one of the things is that we don't just look at financial statements, we look at process efficiency, effectiveness, and all sorts of things. So that means that we may look at cultural data. So for instance, we may do a cultural survey. We may be looking at compliance with copyright. We may be looking at conflicts of interest, so we could be looking at external data. So we have an obligation to get sufficient information, and we also have an obligation to make sure we get reliable information. And in the past, internal audits used to love the notion of doing a sample. And you know, if I go back to the traditional view of an internal auditor, a person with a green pen walking around, or a purple pen walking around, ticking and flicking between lists. You have at that point a risk of sample bias. You also have manual processes, which mean you could have false positives or false negatives. From a data analytics perspective, we now have massive opportunities to check everything. We have an opportunity to get deeper insights into the business. We have an opportunity to ask questions that have never been asked before and provide insights to the business. And on top of that, we have the potential to actually make it real-time or near real-time in terms of handing resources to the business, so management can better manage a business. So in many respects, internal auditors should be data analytics professionals. In my personal opinion, if we're not leveraging the tool set that we should have at our disposal. So my personal view is we should be all upskilling our capabilities.
Fascinating. Do you feel that the dynamic is already changing in the way that more and more people are shifting to these, the way that you describe, where they are using more data and analytics to do the internal audit rather than taking the checkbox.
I would say that it's isolated pockets of people that are doing that. If we look in the industry at the moment, one of the challenges that we've got is there is a massive skill shortage of data analytics professionals.
Mm.
And part of what always happens in terms of anything new is that the uptake takes a while. So in my opinion, data analytics became the new exciting type field for a bit. And now it's starting to flow through to the rest of the business because people can now see the benefits, because people often don't want to be at the bleeding edge of something. They want to be behind it, let someone else have the bruises, do a little bit of the bleeding, have the bad experiences, perfect it, and then they want to adopt it. So I think when I look back at the industry, there are small pockets of people who are starting to do this type of thing, but the challenge is it's not mainstream just at the moment. And part of the reason I don't believe it is mainstream is, one, people don't know where to get started or how to get started. Some people are afraid of the tools. We have at times our own language when we talk about clustering, supervised learning, unsupervised learning, regression analysis, cohorts, and all sorts of things. And that turns sometimes people off.
Yeah.
And another aspect that I have to be blatant about is everyone wants to do machine learning. I want to do AI. This is cutting edge. This is where it's at. Yeah. And in my opinion, we've found a hammer and we've determined that everything in the world is a nail without appreciating that we've got screws, we've got joints, we've got other bits and pieces we can actually use to construct a frame.
Exactly.
And we need to always come back, what is the simplest tool to get the output? Because the moment we start to go to something more complex, we actually have increased training time. We have supervised learning, and so we've already got to go, well, what is the outcome we're actually learning for? Let's go through an iterative process. We've got potential black box. How do we interrogate this in terms of the process? So I always come back, what is the simplest way to get the job done?
Mm. So from your experience of doing these data analytics within the internal function, what would be your advice for the internal auditor in other university to get started and using some of these?
The part that I would sort of advise for people is that one of the best things you can do is find an internal project. So rather than going out to the business first, start to develop your skill sets internally where it's safe. Try and get some insights, because there is less danger of failing in something that's hidden to an extent and is not going to be published throughout the organisation.
Mm.
So find an internal pet project. And if you don't mind, I'd like to go into a little bit of detail about what my project was. So one of the challenges I found when I stepped into this role was it was very manual and it was very traditional as an internal audit focus. And having come from finance, one of the things that I noticed, Jason, was that we have multiple systems. So we actually had a system for paying credit card payments and a system for drawing EFTs out and paying it through our main financial systems. So we had two payment systems. And while the financial system would check for duplicate payments within itself, someone paying by a credit card versus another person paying by credit card had no checks. So one of the first things that I did was, can I get access to the two data sets? Yes, I can. And I'd like to make a segue into how that was achieved. We used a technology called robotic process automation. So I'm very, very lazy. If I can automate something so I can set and forget, and even if it takes me 3 times longer to do it once or 4 times or 5 times, I'll do that, because then I can go, hey, this is on autopilot now. So I used robotic process automation to interrogate 2 data sets. And then I noticed that the data quality in one data set was not as high, because the people we were paying, or the entities we were paying, did not have validation on the entity names. So the easiest way to fix that from my perspective was to use a phonetic algorithm. So it was a modified soundex to correct basic spelling mistakes and make sure that if someone assumed a name was spelt one way when it was spelt a slightly different way, that I could have a comparison indicator. So I combined the vendor name or supplier name together with the payment amount and one or two other attributes from the credit card data, did the same thing over the accounts payable data. And in this particular instance, the accounts payable data was much higher quality. I merged the two data sets, did a comparison and found an overpayment.
Wow.
And churning through 18 months of data on two systems, the whole process took about 5 minutes once it was in train using robotic process automation. And I found a duplicate payment. And all of a sudden the business goes, oh, wow, you can compare different data sets that are slightly disparate. You come out with a result and you can tell us if we're making overpayments.
Wow.
That was my pet project. And I didn't tell them initially until I said, by the way, here's the result. And all of a sudden they go, oh, you've got insight into our business that we don't have.
Yes.
So start small, do an internal project that doesn't have visibility. If it's something that has benefit, make it visible. Provide time for your staff to learn because we need to upskill people. In terms of other aspects, provide structured individual development plans. If you can do an assessment of people's skills, identify the gap to where you want to get them. Once you start to perfect that skill set, the next parts that I would encourage people to do is look where it can be used. So we used it on audits. We then started to expand our activities. So, for instance, we're now scraping external data to do conflict of interest searches. So not only have we used internal data, we've progressed to external data. Demonstrate the benefits to people. So when I could show them, hey, look, we can detect duplicate payments. We've done it fast. It now turns through 18 months worth of data in approximately 5 minutes. People are like, wow, we've never been able to do this before. And probably one of the biggest things to try and really sell this to the business is provide reusable, tangible data analytics reports and monitoring mechanisms you can hand to the business. Because going back to my notion about being lazy, let's empower other people to do the work. And then from an internal audit perspective, we can check that they are doing the work. So instead of me having to churn through data all the time and run reports, the business now does it. They action things. I run some reports to check that they've been doing that. And then I can say, hey, there is compliance over this. We are checking for duplicate payments.
Fascinating. Do you think it has all of these data analytics and also you supplementing it with the robotic process automation? Do you think it has changed the way that your team conduct the works with the internal audit, risk and compliance significantly?
I do think it has. So if we step back to look at how we're doing things, so we've been trying to push RPA and we use automation across the institution in different areas. So one of the big things about trying to do data analytics is you can't really do data analytics with bad data. No one wants to be really providing someone with false positives and false negative results and then be torn to pieces that the data is not reliable. What do you know? You don't have insights into our business because immediately you're losing credibility.
Exactly.
So if we can improve and standardize our data and make our data consistent through automation, instantly the value of data analytics has increased. But also, data analytics is good for trying to get insights from data. But RPA can be used to provide data quality, but it can also be used to massage and fix certain aspects of data, such as merging data in my example of two disparate data sets. So using it this way, what we've found is we've started to move from reactive, historical analytics to more current, real-time analytics. And all of a sudden, we're looking at the whole population instead of looking at a part population. We're providing ongoing assurance rather than point-in-time assurance. And it's now giving us the capacity to do more. So to be honest, the process is actually transforming everything we're doing. And then when we do data visualization of the results, because one of the things that I've hated is when I first stepped into the role, we provided our board with lots and lots of text. And I've moved towards trying to push some dashboards that consolidate information and provide them a more accurate snapshot on one page, because there's nothing worse than trying to read 200 pages, remember what you've read before, take a highlighter to it, cross-reference it, and especially when you're trying to deliver that to people who are busy, to people who have other things on their mind and are trying to balance and weigh things up. We've got to remember that as data analytics professionals, our job is to simplify. We have to simplify and get it across, and as an appropriate message in an appropriate format, in appropriate timing.
Hey all, I just want to give a quick shout out about this episode. It's sponsored by the Embedded Analytic Program at DDA. And the Embedded Analytic Program is designed for senior manager and executive in the business team who want to integrate data science into daily business operation and use it to drive customer experience excellence and revenue. And book unlimited strategy session for a full year and start embedding analytics into the business frontline. For more information about this program, please refer to the description of this episode. Now, let's get on back to the interview. My question for you is, you got me to think that your team as an internal audit or assurance is more like a functional team. And a lot of time, data analytics, they are seen as the second skill set in terms of the importance of the list of the skill set they should master. How do you empower them to perform the function of the internal audit, risk and compliance, but at the same time also take it to one step further using the data analytics?
That's probably been our biggest challenge, because with individuals in a team, you have a diverse range of skill sets. So for us, initially, it was about trying to demonstrate the value of the process in terms of incorporating data analytics. And I believe I've sort of talked a little bit about this, about starting a little project and demonstrating it. So using that as the basis, that's what we did. We started to demonstrate the value of it. But then as our capacity grew, one of the things that we did is we looked for further points of integration in our processes. And the reason we did that is that while data analytics proved itself effectively to provide some answers in terms of duplicate payments and to start to alert management, we hadn't incorporated that into our full day-to-day process. And part of what we've done is we've started to step back and go, we're now on this journey. Let's incorporate it into our planning process. So part of the reason we've incorporated into the planning process is we've got to do a risk-based audit plan. What better to assess risk than real life data rather than a subjective assessment of risk? So by trying to pull out information on where we have compliance issues or a risk assessment happens to be not as good as other areas, we're now trying to incorporate more and more actual real assessments on data analytics to feed into our risk plan, to make our risk plan dynamic. And that also then means that because that's another internal project, we've got an upskilling opportunity for people there. As we're progressing and on some activities we save time, we can reinvest that time to continue that upskill journey. So that's the sort of thing that we've been trying to do. We're trying to make time through using data analytics to reinvest in time to complete the upskill and the knowledge transfer. And it's not an easy journey, unfortunately.
What are the challenges that come with this in that journey?
The first challenge is individuals. So if we take an individual, whenever they feel stressed or overworked, the first thing they do is they revert back to what they know. So if someone's used to just jumping in and doing a tick and flick to achieve something, if they're feeling stressed, sometimes we jump in and go, I'm going to just do it. I don't have time to think, stop and work through the process. At times, to be honest, it's also the case where if you don't plan it and don't think about it, sometimes you immediately go, oh, I'm familiar with solution X, I'm just going to use solution X. And I talk about, previously, artificial intelligence as being seen as the ultimate goal of data analytics. Let's get into full predictive analytics. I'm going to use this. Yeah, I'm going to be at the cutting edge. And go, well, hold on, a simple check on correlations would have worked here, or a little bit of regression analysis would have worked here, instead of trying to head down and make a project bigger than Ben-Hur or bigger than the Titanic. And we know how the Titanic ended up. So sometimes it's about the right tool for the right job to get things done. The other part is, I think sometimes people, especially professionals, are scared of failure. I don't want to start down this track. What happens if I bugger it up? This isn't going to look good on me. And we've got to embrace success as well as failure. And failure, I think, there's an acronym about it's the first attempt in learning.
Yeah.
To fail is the first attempt in learning. And if we think about it, a lot of scientific discoveries were based on people who made so many mistakes, but they had this stubborn personality and said, you know what, I'm not going to let this win. I'm just going to keep at it. And that's the thing. We are wired to remember our mistakes better than we are to remember our successes. If you think about a hard-won battle that you've had to work through a problem, you remember that, generally speaking, more than something that came to you instantly. You can then provide guidance to people on how to do it better.
What is the risk if a functional team like internal audit, if they are not leveraging the emerging technology, do you think they're going to be left behind so badly?
Well, I think we've probably got to separate the risk out into two components. So if it's a function like internal audit, the risk is that the business is no longer solvent. We don't pick up on fraud. We don't pick up on bad culture. And if we look at corporate failure like OneTel, Harris Scarfe and other organisations, that type of thing happens too often.
Exactly.
So that's the immediate risk to the business. But if we break it down to internal audit professionals or professionals in any area, the first thing I think is professional credibility. How can we go to the business and say you're not effective and efficient in your processes, and we're there with the pen, the paper going tick and flick? It's hypocritical, unfortunately. Another aspect is reputation. Do you want to, as an internal auditor, for instance, for me, do I want to go and tell the business what they already know? Do I want to be not really adding any value to their process and for them to go, gee, we really don't want to engage with internal audit because they're not telling us anything new? Or do I want to be going through, I'm providing you real-time data, I'm providing you with the ability to have insights, I'm providing you with the ability to monitor how things are going, I can comment on the efficiency, the effectiveness, and at the same time, I've got some insights so that hopefully I'm taken seriously as a partner in the business. Another aspect I think is relevancy. Are we relevant to the business? Are we actually providing a good narrative and providing something to them? Timeliness, if we do an audit manually, it's a point-in-time assessment rather than ongoing assessment. So the degree of assurance has been reduced. Another aspect is, have we moved to a real value-add proposition? So if we're doing audits and we're doing audits slowly and we're doing audits manually, they tend to be an operational outcome because we tend to handle those things that we're often familiar with. Whereas if we can automate to a large extent, bring in data analytics, we start to move away from operational because we've got coverage in a lot of the operational areas and we can start to focus on strategy. We're starting to harvest external data. We're starting to monitor things. And I suppose the last thing I can think of is that it's efficiency. Do I really want to be doing a repetitive task when I can be creating wonderful dashboards and insights and looking at data and then going back to the business and saying, hey, look, I've noticed this. Can you explain your processes to me? And one of the things that I would probably stress that we really need to do with data analytics is Data analytics is an outcome of data. We're trying to get insight. But to really get insight, we also need to understand the process. So I'd always encourage people when they're undertaking data analytics activities to also understand the process, because better insight comes with an understanding of process and data rather than data in isolation.
Absolutely. I so agree with that. I think I always encourage people to go to speak to the front line to understand how exactly they use the system or how exactly they create those sort of process, because a lot of time the data behavior will come true because of the way that how people create the system and the process. That is so spot on.
The other part that, if I may say, is sometimes the process changes. And what we find as an anomaly is actually an explanation of a change in operating procedure, sometimes triggered through legislation, change in management, or other bits and pieces. And that then offers great insight.
Exactly. Now you talk about moving away from the operational, and I so agree with that. But the question I have for you then is, how do you encourage the innovation and thinking outside of the box in your team when your team maybe seem to be more of an operational team or more of a functional team rather than a R&D team? How do you balance that?
Part of the way we try and balance it is that as we're starting any task, we look and go, can we use data analytics? Can we work smarter? Can we automate this? So coming back to asking ourselves a number of questions, because the thing is that to really affect change, we've got to try and make something different in our behaviour. So instead of immediately jumping in and working with what I said, you tend to revert to the familiar when you've got a lot of tasks to do. Trying to provide an opportunity for people to experiment. There's nothing wrong with trying a new technique and working out whether it is right or wrong and then validating the results. There's other aspects that I think that we can do as well, and that is provide people the opportunity to learn. And I like to link learning with an outcome. So if I've got someone working with me, I like to say, okay, I'd like you to look at technique X. So once you've done something with technique X, I'd like you to find an application for it and try and put it into practice. Because if you just learn something and you never repeat it, if you never try and apply it in the real world, it doesn't fire off the neurons inside your brain to try and link it and make it part of your actual memories. So it tends to drop off the radar. If you can find something to make it relevant and then through relevancy make it credible in terms of an outcome, it's a better cognitive process. So from my perspective, it's about trying to always turn something from theoretical and apply it to make it practical.
Now, to sum this up, do you have any advice for the internal audit team or perhaps other functional team leaders who are looking to encourage their team to improve their work through the use of data and analytics?
The advice I would give is start small. There's a whole heap of resources out there. So Jason, your podcasts and your 1 minute information bites, data analytics bites are a wonderful resource. So if they haven't subscribed, they should subscribe. LinkedIn is a great method of finding knowledge. Udemy has various resources that are available as well. They are out there. So start the journey. I personally always like to have a roadmap. So while I have an internal audit strategy and we're encouraged to have one, I also have a bigger roadmap that sits over and tries to provide consistency over a longer period of time. And for me, that was about do a proof of concept, validate the proof of concept, provide some benefits to management, then start increasing skill level, deploying, incorporating into process. And then ultimately for me, the final phases will be into predictive analytics, AI monitoring, linking it back to strategy and trying to change completely the way we work. And I'm also trying to push the organisation not just to do a data warehouse, but to do data lakes to harvest external data, because for me, the value is not just looking internally. The value is starting to aggregate data from multiple sources to validate different hypotheses and situations and see if the data holds true within the context of the external threat environment as well as internally. So I think creation of a roadmap and knowing where you want to go. And if you don't know where you want to go, there's different resources you can look at, and you can look at other people's strategies, because various internal audit functions have strategies about progressing data analytics.
Thank you for the shout out for the Analytic Bite newsletter. And I just want to dwell into what you just said and emphasize again about the starting small. I think a lot of time, too many organizations go into the journey of spending millions and millions of dollars with hundreds and hundreds of people in the team, building a new team, only to find failure. I think what they need to consider of that is the organizational perspective and the human perspective in there. When they are still trying to find value in something new, I think it's always best to start small rather than throwing hundreds and hundreds of people into that, because more people creating more complexity, more people create more political complexity, and those are the things that are completely avoidable when you are starting small.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And one of the aspects is when organisations throw lots of people and lots of money into it, at different points in time, you have multiple people working on the same thing.
Yeah.
And there is a wasting sometimes of resources. But also an observation that I've made is if you start small, you're training internal capacity up. And generally speaking, people who have been at a place for a while will often continue there until circumstances change. You bring in someone new, so you bring in a data analytics top gun. The top gun makes one or two successes sometimes, and then an organisation poaches them. So if you're looking at succession planning and trying to roll that out, you're better off training an individual or two in the organisation and then distributing that skill set across a wider group. If you put all your eggs in one basket, sometimes you make an omelette accidentally.
I love it. Now, these are the two questions to conclude this interview. Number one is, what is your most important first principle?
For me, I suppose that the most important first principle is it all starts with the data. So you have to understand your data and you have to make sure it is clean. If you don't have clean, reliable data that you understand, it's very hard to start to ask questions, and it's also very hard then to launch in and provide an outcome and try and provide insights, and then find you've identified a whole group of false positives or false negatives and you've lost credibility.
Love it. The last question is, what is one book that you have read and thought it would have been better for your younger self to have?
Now, as someone who's always sort of prided themselves on technical capacity, I've found that sometimes in a business environment is not the best way to go. So rather than talk about one book, I'd probably like to talk about a group of books. I think we've got to focus on emotional intelligence, not just technical capacity in this type of role, because what we're actually trying to do is influence people. So anything on emotional intelligence, Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, Stephen Covey's books on Third Alternative, 7 or 8 Habits of Highly Effective People, about trying to develop trust, influence people, and upskill your emotional intelligence. So one of the things I would say is learning data analytics is important, but in some respects, if you're a highly technical person and love getting into the technicalities of data, technicalities of analytics techniques, you may be losing out if you don't focus on your own emotional intelligence.
I agree. And I think as one is going to the career, I think those are the more important skill set to pick up. The technical I think the technical skills is much easier to pick up. I always think that the computer is 1 or 0, so it could never go wrong. Whereas the emotional intelligence or influencing people, those are the more critical skill set and so much harder to pick up, and it always needs more time to practice.
I fully agree, and it's certainly the part that I see over and over again. People in their career struggle to understand why they're not progressing. They are brilliant, technically competent, and then they get overlooked for promotions because people find them too hard to talk to, or the eyes glaze over because they go, I just did this brilliant regression with multiple correlation coefficients, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and rah, rah, rah. And a manager just walks away going, don't know what they're talking about.
Exactly. I agree. Now, thank you so much for sharing of that. I certainly learned so much more about the use of data analytics in the internal audit function. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason. It was my pleasure.
Hello. If you enjoyed this conversation, hit that subscribe button so we can meet again. If you don't, I'll be stuck in an infinite loop. So pull that part by clicking the subscribe and help me out. You can further support us by leaving us a kind review from wherever you are listening. At the end of the year, I will choose a reviewer to send a special gift to, and it might just be you. Look forward to seeing you here next week for a new adventure, if I can find my way out of this endless loop. See ya!